Hi there, this is Brent Harris. I am a personal coach, and my main focus is showing people and guiding people on manifesting their highest potential. So typically the people that I speak to and the people that I work with, they're living their lives in a certain reality, on a certain level of accomplishment. Typically things are going well, they're going fine, everything's kind of holding together on a day-by-day basis. And yet, like in their imagination, they see themselves playing at a bigger and higher level, and just doing more, and also with a sense of concern that they may go their whole lives without ever really offering what's inside them to offer, and that can weigh very heavily on some of us sometimes. And so I found myself really deep in this exploration of what does it mean to actualize all of your potential, and what does it mean to leave it all on the court and to experience deep, deep fulfillment. And I'm starting to realize now what I want to talk to you about. I'm sort of jumping without a safety net, and I really and I do this ideally to get it all in one take, right? I've been starting without really knowing what I mean to say, and kind of hoping that the main message will emerge, and it did successfully yesterday, or last video rather, and I believe it will this time. A quick note: you might be interested to know that, like, if you ever watch these videos, what I would really like to get good at is like picking up steam like really quickly and just hitting the runway and just getting right into it. As it happens, I sometimes need maybe about like a 5-minute on ramp. Where I just kind of get everything into gear. And so usually by the end of the videos, they have like this really like nice sort of quality about them where I'm like really on a roll, and there's like a lot of interesting ideas that are coming out. So for those of you, so if you're watching and if you bear with me, then you know, and if you don't, then you may want to consider like, seeing what happens at the end. So I want to talk to you expressly on the subject of offering all of your life's potential and accomplishing the most that you're able to accomplish in any one lifetime. And I want to start by telling you a story about myself in my attempts over time to become increasingly vulnerable with you, which is what I want to do and what I aspire to. So I seem to have come out of the factory as a really good musician. I had a lot of talent, and I still do, when it comes to music in general, musical theory, musical understanding, and playing the piano, playing the keyboard in particular. And so I went through this phase in my life where I was playing a lot, just constantly playing the piano and sort of performing at school and doing a little bit of classical training here and there, and I gained a lot of attention from a lot of like the parents and teachers and classmates, and they're like, oh my God, yo, look at Brent, look at him play the piano. And there was this idea that I showed a lot of promise to be a musician, like a full-on musician going forward. I never quite valued it as much as everybody else did, because it came very naturally to me, very easily to me, without any effort. Just like as soon as I kind of could be old enough to sort of approach the piano, a lot of it just kind of fell into place. I just kind of improvised and learned how to play melodies and stuff like that. And it almost frustrated me that people would offer all this appreciation, because I'd be like, well, just go do it yourself. It's really easy. And so I never, kind of going into my teens and my 20s, I valued it to some extent, but never really pursued it. Later in my 20s, I went traveling with my girlfriend, and then we came back home, and she became my wife, and I started working and kind of fundraising again. And there was never really a point when I started taking music creation really seriously. And it was more or less fine, but I would feel pangs of guilt and pangs of like, I don't know if perhaps I should be doing this more. And whenever I'd visit, say, with family or friends or people who knew me really well and knew me since the very beginning of my life, or close thereabouts, they would say, well, you should make more music. And so one of the reasons why I hadn't was because I have been spending more time exploring spirituality and exploring enlightenment and exploring awakening, and for myself initially, and then later, after kind of hitting certain kind of critical points with it, offering it to other people and seeing that as the highest priority. I've mentioned in different times that one of my highest priorities as a person, just kind of alive in these times, I seem to have come out of the factory wanting to participate in the awakening of human consciousness as much as I possibly can. I get really excited when I think about the fact that humanity is just on this really cool, unprecedented awakening sort of period that is probably lasting, maybe a couple hundred years, but is nevertheless very turbulent, because like these 100 years is very small in comparison to the previous several thousand years that we've been maintaining kind of an old way of being. And so we're in a place now where we're really in the thick of this awakening and of this shift, because on one hand, it's like everybody's becoming very environmentally conscious and very conscious of their energies and very conscious of peace. And there's like a lot of like, spiritual sayings that are just deep in pop culture and deep in like our common day, everyday culture, such as, just be in the moment, or, just be yourself, or, namaste, or, like just kind of a lot of spiritual stuff. And so that's cool. And what excites me is, and it shouldn't excite me, but it excites me because we, as a species, and I believe a lot of us feel this way, that we're really at a certain precipice where we've been living a certain way for so long, as, again, as a species, where it's been kind of a lot of like accumulation and destruction and sort of wastage, and kind of like, trying to gather as much to myself and like taking from everybody else and from everything else, and trying to like spread ideas across the land and fighting people who don't have those ideas. Like that was kind of like how we've been operating for so long, that it seems that we have brought ourselves to a certain precipice where if we keep going this way without changing how we're going, we will wipe ourselves out. As it appears to me, and like the little research I've done, it kind of looks like it would go that way. Fortunately, there's this whole other crop of humans, this whole other energy that's starting to wake up in all of humans, which you could see as the inclination towards spirituality. When you have people who are just like, they're trying to like fill the void, so to speak, with like possessions and knowledge and achievements and whatever, and money, and bringing it all in, and they go through this moment where it's like, none of this is really satisfying me, and then they turn to spirituality, and then over time they awaken into more and more augmented states of consciousness where they see themselves as part of everything. And then when you start to see that from an experiential level, as opposed to just intellectually knowing like all is one, like, whatever that means, right? When you start to really experience it, the tendency towards violence of all forms tends to just fall away. And the tendency towards collaboration and the benefit of all and the wellness of all becomes a much higher priority, until we find ourselves in a place where all you really want to do is just serve the wellness of all, and just assist humanity as humanity is becoming what it wishes to become. So the guarantee does not seem to be there, but the more of us, the more people apply themselves to the wellness of all, the more we kind of shift the scales towards our wellness and our evolution, and are making it through this precipice into an entirely different life, an entirely different success, an entirely different way of being that's much more stable and much more peaceful, and the creativity is much deeper, and there's much more harmony, and we can kind of work together on much bigger, more ambitious projects, such as for perhaps colonizing other planets or what have you. And so that's what excites me, and so musicians play their part in it for sure, but I myself always wanted to be a speaker, and I wanted to really relate to it much more directly and much more consciously, much more explicitly than a musician would. And so I get a little self-conscious talking about myself. I hope you don't mind me talking about myself, but I promise I'll bring this back to you. So anyway, when I meet with people who remind me of the musician aspect of myself, I sometimes get a little bit uncomfortable. And the reason being is that whereas I feel like pretty good about the decisions that I made to go where I'm going with my life and my career and so forth, I don't feel amazing about it. And I feel pangs of regret and guilt. And I question myself every once in a while with questions like these, like, have I wasted my life? Have I wasted my talent? Am I headed on a crash course towards regret and guilt at the end of my days? This sort of thing has kind of haunted me for a little while. And I'll explain after I sip my water. And I'm treading a little bit lightly here because I'm not sure exactly how much I want to disclose at this one point. But it seems, I can say this, like it seems that this question of, am I wasting my talent? Am I wasting my ability? Am I wasting my time? Am I wasting my life? Am I not doing what I could be doing or should be doing? And am I headed on a crash course towards a death where there's regret and a sense of not having fully released all of my potential? There's something very scary about that and very unpleasant about it and very, very, very gnarly, and what's interesting is that it feels so much a part of our culture that I just kind of started picking up this fear myself. And what's kind of strange is that I started assuming that I'm heading that way. And what I've been doing, it's kind of stupid, but it's becoming really clear now. What I've been doing is preparing myself for that outcome so that I'll be ready for it, so I can be like, okay, let's do it. I'm ready to deal with the regret and the guilt or whatever, instead of putting myself on a different course entirely. So I was sitting at the Junos, which is the Canadian Music Awards. It was held in London, Ontario, just this last weekend, last Sunday, March something, 2019. And I was sitting there, and there's all these artists that are coming out, and all these musicians were being, clapped for and appreciated. And Corey Hart was put into the Hall of Fame, and he was kind of immortalized, and everybody was going nuts for him. And I was sitting there, and I was thinking, man, like all this, like so much regret and so much shame was coming up. But as that was coming up too, it was also like grief, like a grief for either the wasted potential or perhaps either like potential that I've already wasted or am about to waste, not doing what I should have been doing, not doing what I came here to do. And it was really harsh and really, really difficult to deal with, seeing all these people accomplish what I myself felt like I was able to accomplish. And so sitting there, I made an interesting decision, and I would invite you to make this decision with me if this feels appropriate for you, where I put out a request, or I offered an intention. And so in my own practice, I work a lot with intention, where it's like I put something out, and I work with what I'm going to say it's true. I work with the consciousness of the universe, like the universal consciousness, like the deep field of intention that gives rise to all forms and embodies all forms and sits there as the awareness in all forms. That intention, that primal creativity, that realm of absolute unmanifested potential, I speak to that, and I made a request where I said, I want to be on a different track. I want to experience what it feels like to be completely and utterly fulfilled. And I want to live a life where at the end of my days I feel absolutely full and exhausted, but not in the tired out bad way, but exhausted in the completely satisfied, fulfilled sense of having done everything that I came here to do, and everything was left on the court. And now I'm ready for death, and death is perfectly timely, and everything's good. That's what I want. I wonder if that appeals to you too. I'm sure it does. And so So let's take a moment now, if you'd like, to imagine how you would like to feel at the very end of your days. In a moment just like this one, death is coming, and it's imminent, and it's right here, and it's perfectly fine. There's no fear, there's no terror. As a general rule, everybody dies, so it can't be that bad. Death is coming, and it's like, how do I want to feel? What do I want my experience to be like? And I'll offer a few suggestions. Can you imagine feeling perfectly satisfied and completely full of love and affection for everybody that has ever appeared in your life? In a deep, deep sense of gratitude for everything that you've experienced, including the things that you have not been grateful for a long time. And a sense of accomplishment, of real, valid accomplishment. Like, yes, I am accomplished. Yes, I'm a success. Yes, I did it. I did it. It's done. Thank God. It's all done. This moment is perfect. I'm ready. See, that feels kind of good. And see, what's interesting is if you are, like I was a few days ago, put on a course towards regret, you have already just now begun shifting to a different course. You are now on a different timeline. You change your timelines with your intention. And you use your intention by creating an experience that you want to end up in. And so in that way, it doesn't matter how far your death is into the future. And I certainly hope it's nice and far into the future and that you have all the time you need, in between now and then. But this is what I mean by the concept of seeding your experience, seeding your future. It's like you reached into your future and you seeded something there so that it blossoms by the time you arrive at it. And it's there for you, ready as you intended it. So it's like, yes, I want a beautiful death. I want my life to be completely and utterly full, utterly satisfying. I want my success to be absolutely complete and whole. And so you just imbue yourself with that feeling and you put it there. And now on that track, it's like the rest of it fills in, the rest of the track fills in. And so now you're proceeding into a life that ends up that way. And that's how you create your life. That's how you use your intention. It bears mentioning, and this is not all, there's something that happens when you use this kind of technique, and it doesn't always happen, but it sometimes happens, and it happened to me. So I was watching the Junos and watching these people perform, and I went into my timeline, and I chose a different timeline. I'm like, I want to be fulfilled right now, starting right now. And I did that, and it was really nice, and I felt all this kind of energy move, and it felt warm and kind of glowy, and I took it with me into the following few days. But then what I found, and this was kind of over the course of today, over this morning and leading up today, it's kind of the afternoon as I'm making this for you now. I became aware of this deeply rooted belief that I'm a fuck up, that I'm a bit of a bum, I guess, or a bit of an invalid kind of what's the word? Just somebody who hasn't achieved, like a low achiever, a non-achiever, a fuck up is really the best word for it. And this has been in my intention. This has been in my attention before. But it really came at me full blast today, and it was so heavy, and again it felt like grief, and so as it approached, I looked at it and I was like, okay, like, I'm ready to be done with this. Like, I'm ready to really experience this feeling completely. And disappointment is the operative word here. And so I said, I don't know who to, perhaps to myself, I said, like, I'm willing to move completely into disappointment, completely into failure, not in terms of the physical sense, but into the experience of being a fuck up, of being a disappointment to myself and everybody, to being a failure. Like, let's do this now. Let's move into it. And I felt myself merging with this feeling. It was very scary at first. And then I kind of got a little taste for it. And there was kind of an attraction as I just went deeper and deeper and just allowed it to move. And it just kind of moved like a soup, like this way through me. And then at the end, there was like this, kind of like, kind of like this movement that just came up and out of me. And it's like, I'm done. The story's done. The narrative is done. I was keeping the whole thing awake with my perpetual thing. Like, I was keeping it awake on one hand by continuing to imagine myself headed towards regret, guilt, and shame by my death. And I was making it happen by just constantly believing underneath everything that I was a fuck up and a disappointment. And it was like what would happen is I was kind of suspended in a certain abeyance where I would be like, oh no, I'm a fuck up. And like, no, more willpower. I'm going to do better. And I'd kind of hit a point here and then come back. And just sort of staying here. And now it's like moving through. And now I'm free. And now there's nothing to be against and nothing to fight. It's just, I'm just not in that story anymore. That's not the story of me anymore. There's no doubt or guilt or shame or regret or anything. It's just a different place. And I did that by finally merging with the experience that was always looming in the background, always threatening in the background. And I moved into it completely and fully and finally, without any fear or any fight, just a recognition. And it was good. Pay attention to any fear that there is in your experience. So sitting with me right now, you're listening. Feel into your field now, your energy, the experience of being you. And some people call this the feeling tone of your existence. And I really like this term, where it's like, what's the feeling tone of you? Like, if you were a note in the universe, what would that note be like? What is that? And as you tune into that, is there fear? Are you afraid of some kind of outcome? And look at that fear. What are you afraid of? What are you underneath everything always trying to get away from? Always fighting, always afraid it's going to happen. It would typically be the first thing you think of in the morning and the last thing you think of just before you fall asleep. What are you afraid of? Look at this fear. And if it's your desire to be free of this fear, all that's required is look just beyond the fear and look at the space that gives room to the fear, that holds the fear. Look at what the fear exists in. Because the experience of fear, it's like a cloud typically. It's sort of like an emotional sort of jumble of feeling. But it's very insubstantial, but slightly substantial. Look at the space that holds it. What is that? Tune into it. Look at how quiet and serene it is. Look at how virgin and unmarred it is, and how there's no fear at all. There's nothing that could ever touch it. And look at how the experience of fear, even just if you bring attention to it, that's enough to kind of make it move, and it kind of dissolves or kind of completes itself in some way. That's typically what happens. And look at how the space that holds the fear endures after the fear is gone. Learn about that space. Draw your attention to that space. Because the more you do, the less you will identify with that which appears in that space. And the more you orient yourself around the space in which the thoughts and feelings and fear appears, the more you get a sense of your deepest identity, what you are on the deepest level. This is enough to make fear go away. This is enough to clear up fear. Thank you. That's all I got for you. You can always get a free session with me. I'll add a link in the description below. And as a final note, I hope you'll be kind to yourself. Be good to yourself. That's all I got. All right, bye.